Well, here we are again. With the rise of indie gaming since the 2010s, there are many more examples to bring out and showcase from the world. A ton of games made out of passion and respect for the old classics, or new ideas that are so out of this world, they would never have shown up under the scrutiny of AAA demands. We're still seeing the rise of great games built by small teams. There's so many of them that we couldn't really cover them in a single video, but this time we're doing it a bit differently. So you might see some games here that are going to really stretch the idea of what a racing game is. Some may be familiar territory, some being more of a sideline to racing, and others being the furthest idea to racing. But if it has a vroom vroom, I don't see why they should be excluded. Going to the future for some futuristic action and some of the fastest machines man can imagine, and defying the laws of gravity, causing carnage in a festival of destruction, or in the alternative future, turn with style on the mountain roads, or at least try to survive. Of course, as per usual, all of the games that will be showcased are available on Steam or other marketplaces like GOG, Epic Games, so if you're interested and want to support any of them, you should get them from these official channels and avoid buying secondhand keys. Without further ado, let's jump to the first game. And we start off with an instant rule breaker. This game is not really a racing game per se, but it's more of a driving roguelike RPG. Made by YCJY, an indie game studio run by just 2 people based in Sweden, with pixel-based illustrations and visual design, being closer to games like Papers, Please in a lot of ways, being a spiritual sequel to their first game, Keep Walking. Keep Driving has the final goal of you driving from point A to point B, simulating that once-in-a-lifetime experience of being a teenager in the early 2000s, trying to get to a concert on the other side of the country, in your lovely shitbox with all the distractions and shifting interests included. To start this adventure, we simply have to complete our license details, filling out our portrait, relationship with parents, current or prior job experience for a chosen passive ability, and the starter kit of items for this journey. Finally, the choice of vehicle, although initially only the sedan is available, for a good reason as it's the most average for both storage space, seats, and fuel, compared to the truck which has a bigger storage, lower seat count and fuel tank, or the muscle car with smaller storage, lower seat count, and bigger fuel tank. Despite these differences, you don't exactly control the driving. So what is the core gameplay here? The challenge here comes from the resource management, covering things like your energy, while things like hunger, thirst, and temperatures are considered as debuffs affecting energy. Car maintenance from upgrades, durability to the fuel, which passengers to take in based on their skills, and in some cases, what your passengers need, as each of them have their own individual quests. All of this comes into play with the game's combat, so to speak, where random events trigger in the middle of the road from almost anything. Traffic being too slow, battle them. Dumb animals on the road, battle them. Piss break, heaven or hell. The battle itself can be explained by the threat icons indicating which resources it will damage, with your own ability or items featuring similar icons. All we have to do is match them and poof, the problems are gone. Abilities, however, have limited uses that can be replenished after resting or costing energy, while items get consumed after use, making you constantly think of what to prioritize in combat, which resources to spend or save in each encounter, especially when we consider how many aspects of the game may affect the gameplay, like how the weather or time of day can make things significantly harder, although we do have the option to run away by stepping on the accelerator in exchange for some damage. A lot of these encounters will be run into with jobs and quests to take in for cash, which is necessary to buy items to deal with the challenges in the journey, since most of them will have you deliver something with a deadline or make you spend energy for a certain amount of time, leading into the next important aspect of route selection. The route you take will determine how much fuel is consumed, like how taking the highways will spend more fuel compared to the country roads, and some random self-introspections. I mean, we all had this during long drives, don't we? Each hitchhiker we bring in will also have their own abilities and level being used mainly to tackle the combat and exploration, with higher levels unlocking new active and passive abilities, which can be either advantageous or a detriment. For us, however, while it's going to be based on earned skill points that we can spend on the different skill trees and more abilities, but be aware as most abilities will cost resources to use, with some refunding if their criteria are met. There's also the chance to lose abilities when hitchhikers leave, depending on their quest endings or even if you fulfill their quests. In between the roads, there are hub areas like villages or towns. These places serve as the place to replenish resources, scattered throughout this massive map that are interconnected by the country roads and highways, seemingly based on a mix between the US and Europe. You'll find information regarding what is available in each town in the map screen, with the icons giving identification modifications to what is going to be available there, alongside the gas cost and distance affecting how many random events that could trigger. Generally, there's the gas station with its supermarket where we can buy the general food, drinks, gas, and some miscellaneous parts that may be available. Hotels to rest up and jump towards specific times of day while recovering ability use, although we can do an alternative method of just resting in the car or with tents with varying effectiveness. Thrift stores for selling items at higher rates or more music and books to dig your face in. And finally, the ability to tune up the car in garage shops with parts that we have scavenged or purchased from the body shop itself as a way to help out during jobs, exploration, and combat, as the game contains many different terrains and modifications that can be turned into advantages with setups. There are also areas where we get to explore on foot, turning the game into a classic dungeon crawling experience, scavenging for items and quest objectives, with obstacles requiring tools to tackle, while spending energy in the process. These tools may even come in handy to auto-clear certain combat encounters. But while we're here, you can also converse with your fellow hitchhikers for extra lore, continuation of their quest line, as some of them can unlock different opportunities for the different endings, provide a ton of resources, or have them stay with you till the end of the journey. They can also provide some bonuses like these. The music in this game is surprisingly really good. They fit a lot of the whole road trip vibe. Unfortunately, they're also copyrighted, so I'd rather not be shut by the music mafia. Turning the music on for gameplay also offers some powerful bonuses during the combat sections. Due to the side quest mechanic, there will be many trips back and forth, which is going to cover a lot of the gameplay. The concert itself is the ultimate time limit. It gives you enough leeway to explore the map for every bit of content this game has to offer, whether it be the conversations between passengers, tuning up the car for many other events, or to see the end of every single character's questline before their own deadlines. And being a roguelike title means the challenge and opportunities every run will be different, with the different cars to play with, different equipment, hitchhikers, and of course the many different endings, with a lot of them giving a brand new starter item package and keeping the upgrades for whichever car was used in the previous runs, or even activating new features and events for future runs, adding a ton of new mechanics to tackle with arguably bigger difficulty on repeat runs. Although some criticism needs to be levied with how often the game repeats its side quests and random events, making some of the combat too repetitive.
I would definitely recommend you to try it out for yourself, as what's here is quite interesting and continuously changes by each run. And the story here can be quite a deep and meaningful look into the coming of age and finding our purposes in life. Next one on the list is a title that had a pretty interesting history to its development.
In the beginning, there was Crash Drive 3D, a sandbox driving game that was made back in the early 2010s, with a focus on multiplayer content. The sequel would come out in 2013, made available for Steam for both Windows PC and Linux, mobile devices, and a Switch release way later, until the year 2021, with the release of Crash Drive 3, keeping most of the DNA of its predecessor intact, just with somewhat better graphics and a set art style. This does mean the game still mostly revolves around the idea of being a multiplayer-focused sandbox with very minimal single-player content available. It sounds like it's going to be its biggest detriment, but this game is also released on almost every single platform under the sun, with crossplay enabled, letting you race against your friends or siblings from the comfort of your phone. Mastery of the game itself is going to take quite a while, as the challenges of the game not only come from other players, but also the physics, map design, and every single car in the game, as each has their own shapes and weight distribution that can make them unique to one another. While the game itself is mainly designed to be played in a multiplayer lobby, it is possible to experience the game completely offline as a single-player game. It can be useful to practice, but it also comes with the side effect of changing some rules, making some of them harder to achieve than normal. The one path to unlock new vehicles. Normally you can earn them from pulling stunts and whatnot, but one of the easier methods can come from winning events, which really puts your skills to the test. If you're not playing just for a simple fun time, then all these 47 cars are mostly going to be the main goal to achieve, as each vehicle has specific characteristics with length and weight class being either light, medium, or heavy, and each car has their own customizations. Most of the upgrades are cosmetics like antennas, nitro colors, and license plates. But then there's the performance upgrade, which is kind of weird. Normally they can just go up passively as we play, but because this method can take ages, there will be a desire to just max out the cars with money, which then unlocks the ability to buy the next new car, which will need to be upgraded as well to unlock the next car, and so on. This system makes the game into a pretty grindy mess at some points, and the lack of freedom to just choose which car to unlock can get really grating, especially so if you're playing on mobile, as cash earned are reduced for this version, and there's also the addition of gems as a currency, with some vehicles being locked behind these gems that can be somewhat farmed or purchased. It's the trade-off for being free on this platform. Multiplayer for the game operates like a GTA Online free mode, where every player is collected in the map and there's always a rotation of game modes that will play after every few minutes. Each game mode will bring in the payout while also requiring different types of knowledge and skills to test, like the stun mode, which will require some basic skills to pull off high scoring stunts, with the chosen vehicle or map knowledge with the stun rings. A cops and robbers mode for some frantic multiplayer chases. This can be a bit unbalanced, with robbers not having any access to nitrous, while in a mad dash to collect as much gold as possible. King of the Hill, which can be pretty chaotic with more players fighting for the scoring zone, something a bit similar with the King of the Crown mode. A beach ball mode, which can be a bit weird since the goal is about who can deal the most damage to the ball, but this does work as a way to test game knowledge about terrain and stunts, especially in offline mode, as the goal becomes to straight up destroy the ball. But then we have the usual events like racing or coin collector, where routing comes in handy. A tag event that's more about tagging objects by stunting on them. Find the ring race mode is a bit like a scavenger hunt, or if you and your friends are craving for some more violence, a tank battle mode to feed that World of Tanks addiction. Normally while attempting these game modes, you'll earn money passively through stunts, but winning is also pretty lucrative with a big boost at the top, with 5 maps in total, each having its own setups, positioning, and secrets, taking us to the canyons, forest castle, frozen Arctic, tropical island, and up to the moon. Each map can be accessed from the map or by driving through the designated paths. Accessing them, however, requires obtaining green rings and some cash on hand. That way players still spend enough time on each map to know the special stun locations on hand. Besides, this also can be useful to look around the map for airdropped cash boxes, which gives around a couple $100s worth of cash to help with faster money grind, or to deal with some specific challenges that can appear while leveling up the player level or all the achievements.
Either way, the game loop is kinda simple. It's more of a party driving type game than a full-on racing game. It's fun with friends or with a group of randoms. For another bit of throwback, do you remember the old Flash top-down racing games that we used to play on our browsers? Well, if you don't, you're gonna see something close enough to it.
As the name would suggest, Ultimate Racing 2D is in fact a two-dimensional racing game featuring a top-down view, taking players from karting to the other racing disciplines, so the game itself is a motorsport simulator with a bit of flair from the classics, featuring some of the oldest disciplines with historical cars, supercars, go-karts, and a couple more pages of different types of racing disciplines. Going into the more silly category options of limousine, tractors, combine harvester, RC cars, police cruisers, and the top of the motorsport world, forklift racing. The tracks will also follow suit depending on which is chosen, like how some discipline will simply take place in ovals, some will take on proper racetracks, historical tracks for the vintage racing, or the road courses for sports and formula racing classification. Most of the tracks will be based on actual tracks to some amount of accurate details, minus the verticality due to our angle of view, which may end up oversimplifying some aspects of the races. Due to the basic nature of the game, however, there isn't really much in terms of choices within each discipline. They're mostly just color changes that will determine what team, drivers, and stats you're getting. For the racing itself, well, it's kind of what is expected. Simple. The clash category being the one thing that heavily determines how the car will handle. The interesting part comes from the paths taken during career building, with the choice of event mode, season mode, or coin mode. Depending on the choice, it will determine what is needed or how to progress. For example, in the event mode progression, there's the choice of using preset vehicles or using purchased ones instead, which opens the ability to manually tune or upgrade, while progressing simply requires winning or finishing within the specified placement, making this progression the most linear out of the other options. Season mode, on the other hand, has the full range of customization, giving players the choice to customize how to progress, whether upgrades are enabled or disabled, how long will the season last, etc. But the most important part is choosing which racing discipline to start from, giving this game mode the most amount of freedom to play the game. Of course, the choices here will also determine the goal and difficulty of the races, with stronger teams requiring a very high placement for contracts, which places coin mode in the middle, as while it is linear at the very beginning due to a lack of coin, more money earned also allows us to jump to a much higher discipline and teams. This is actually a super interesting way way to set up a motorsport career, as it essentially scratches almost every type of itch for the genre, giving the option and power to the player to choose what kind of progression they would want, while still giving them the option to switch if they get bored. That's also including the free play mode and the editor for some more customization, like the ability to change team names, create or use custom liveries, customize stats, and generate our own tracks to race on. Hell, the game even has some online and local multiplayer for those that want to play with some friends.
This is one of those games that is so simple and easy to understand, and it doesn't have any complex mechanics to it, but that simplicity opens the door for many types of approaches that the players can make. Coincidentally, our next game on the list might also hit that throwback to the 90s. How many of you know Roll Cage?
A racing game from over 2 decades ago that at the time was a very remarkable showcase of technology, as it was one of the very first racing games where the players could drive on the walls or even the ceiling. And in 2018, some of the former developers had reappeared to bring us a spiritual successor to that game. Grip Combat Racing, as I've just described, is in a way a modernized spiritual successor of Roll Cage, a futuristic high-speed racer with some combat elements where drivers could drive on the walls and ceiling. But before we get to the action, we should cover the vehicles first, as each of them will contain different stats and customization for its colors, decals, and tire options, with the other vehicle locked behind driver levels for now, as each of them are also classified by the different manufacturers to sort of determine what their speciality is at. Some may prefer higher acceleration, higher top speed, or a balanced stat of both, but then each of these cars will also have a zero gravity or flight variant with no wheels, which also means heavily relying on things like air brakes for cornering. The campaign itself is separated into multiple tiers containing different tournaments to race on, which seems to be quite linearly designed. Depending on the tiers, different race types and pickups will become available. In a way, the linearity of this game is an attempt to ease players into the game's full features, but its pacing is definitely a bit slow, with having to beat 3 tournaments per tier, usually leading to finishing around 8 races in total. The first 2 encounters will be the normal races with everything available, and Speed Demon removing every single weapon pickup for turbos, later introducing the ultimate race that does the opposite of Speed Demon, even encouraging destroying opponents over simply finishing first. The elimination race, the usual rules. And finally, an arena deathmatch mode, to really hone into the combat part of the game. The feeling of driving these machines is particularly fast. They're not as fast as the usual anti-gravity racers, but they're still fast enough to make it feel super intense, even in the lower levels. Mix that up when the pickups come into play or the init boosters, and you got yourself a recipe for some fast-paced action. And because the vehicle are two-sided, this allows players to essentially pull off aerial stunts without having to worry about being beached upside down, assuming they can actually stick the landing at least. This problem, however, is going to be quite dependent on the tracks, as each of them are designed with specific themes in mind, like the first track consisting of the simple half-pipe layout for newcomers to grasp the gimmick, with later tracks that amps up the complexity. So you may notice they are separated based on the planet they're based on. The desert planet Jahatra, usually filled by derelict machinery, Lido 5 with its mixture of terrain due to its aggressive alien plant life, Norwo's the obligatory ice planet, and Orbital Prime, the only artificial planet of the selection. In total, there are 32 racetracks, including reversed variants. Normally, the planets themselves will also determine what to expect from the tracks, with Orbital Prime races taking place on the highways, with not much wrecks or wildlife scattered to either hinder or work as ramps or pathways, while places like Jahatra will cover canyons and the scattered derelict ships and wreckages, turning them into makeshift racetracks. But combat isn't the only gimmick featured here. With the gravitational mechanics, it opens up to other more diverse avenues to play around with alternative game modes, which leads us to the so-called parkour stages, designed as the place to learn, practice, and perfect your mastery of the game's physics and gimmicks, featuring stages focused on things like jump control, speed, and airtime, taking everyone off the rails once we get into the faster vehicles at higher driver levels. However, there are times when the physics can fail, with some of the natural bumps causing the vehicles to lose speed or end up getting some airtime, and in some weird cases, the drivable walls may end up backfiring when weapons fail and clip into the tracks, exploding on our face instead of the opponents. These kinds of issues sometimes are a result of skill issues, but there will be times when they just happen out of nowhere. With how fast the races are, these kinds of setbacks can really cost the race, which also had a weird mechanic where the game will also tally up lap times to determine a winner for some reason. That one is minor, but it's still a confusing pop-up to get after finishing a race.
But the game itself is pretty alright. You can get it for a few dollars on Steam or GOG with with all the post-launch content available. The only thing that doesn't work is the online multiplayer in GOG, so it's mainly a split-screen multiplayer. It's a similar tale to Ballistic NG, a spiritual successor to Wipeout to an insane degree that it feels like its own entry into the series.
Race around tracks at insanely high speeds, picking up items and taking advantage of boost pads while battling a number of opponents. So basically the Wipeout experience. The challenges stem from controlling the vehicle at the breakneck speed to ensure it stays as fast as possible, requiring the use and mastery of air brakes on corners. Alternatively, there is an option to turn on assists for easier driving, but you would spoil the experience that way. The main campaign revolves around the whole anti-gravity league, with 10 of them in total. There's the option to also create custom campaigns if the official ones felt a bit too stale, where we can make our own event group and layout with custom reward settings. But there's also the expansions like the Masano Islands and Neon Knights campaign, or the more expansive 2280 AGL series, introducing an alternative ship model based on the 2280 regulations. Ultimately, the game itself is quite simple, with the depth of mastering the ship controls being the biggest hurdle. Each ship manufactured by the different teams and manufacturers specializes in different aspects of the sports, whether it be acceleration, top speed, handling, or the combat-orientated shielding and firepower. The lore building with these manufacturers would also end up explaining the existence of current classifications like the Barracuda, the most powerful machine that ended up getting outright banned in regular events due to its insane capabilities and locked into its own special classification events. But if you're looking for some goofy examples, there's these smaller machines that may resemble anti-gravity go-karts and bikes. Mastery of the pickups will be another matter to discuss, as each weapon behaves and affects differently from each other, including how effective they can be in certain tracks, which comes in handy with the event types available, with the normal races being the most obvious. Time trial, where the goal is to beat the record time, knockout events where the last place ship gets eliminated, and some of the more unorthodox ones like survival, where the challenge comes from not being able to slow down in a slithering track. And with the set speed climbing up consistently, this mode is perhaps the one that will truly test your reflexes. Then we have the Eliminator, where the objective is to get the most kills, although this one is a bit cheesy by just hanging in the back and firing every available arsenal we got. The remaining game modes cover things like Upsurge, Rush Hour, and Stunts, each having unique requirements for winning. The career mode is also separated by the different speed tiers, with Toxic at the lowest and Zen at the fastest. This will of course affect the difficulty. For progressing in the career, it's mainly based on the medals achieved, and it's usually rewarded by alternative liveries based on the rank. But the real magic of the game comes from its custom races, where any player can set up events however they like. Thanks to the mod support, this also lets everyone turn the game into a completely different beast, whether it's for simply changing the tracks or outright turning an entire event into a direct reference or adaptation of other games.
This is on top of what is arguably the most faithful unofficial follow-up to Wipeout. It's up there as one of the best anti-gravity racers. With these futuristic titles going for more than just simple racing, some of them opt for more a intimate, immersive, or engrossing experience with some cool music.
One of the earlier examples of an indie racing game where the goal is to simply reach the target destination. Simple, but what makes this game interesting is in the process, as the stages progressively become more and more complex while switching out the layout to give out this subtle way of environmental storytelling, with the world being mostly this futuristic neon world that feels as beautiful and oppressive compared to many cyberpunk dystopias. Even when the environment changes, there's something extremely unique about it, like it's trying to say something on an artistic level. Just ask anyone to listen to the soundtrack, they'll tell you the same. Even its visual design is made to be as immersive as it can be, with the UI being as subtle as possible, being stored in the backside of the car, keeping attention to the most important bit of the game. There's even times when the game feels more like a horror game than a racing game, with how uneasy and some of the environment and storytelling can be. To the game's credit, that section is done pretty nicely with how well you can piece out what the game is trying to tell you by just paying attention to the surroundings, which is in tandem with how they introduce the challenges and new mechanics, by mixing in mechanics from arcade racers, platforming, and a bit of survival, which at its core is not that different from the arcade classics, with the twists of having a booster with an overheat mechanic, the ability to jump and fly to avoid obstacles later, with some neat track designs that are made to teach players about the ability to drive on walls, or the fact that getting lasered in half is not the end of the road just yet. All of this simply done by placing obstacles in ways that would lead players into discovering them naturally. As the obstacles intensifies, introducing layers on top of each other for players to tackle, all happening in one session, with the only only interruption being the loading screen between sectors. There's no garage or shop menus to halt the progress even further. It's almost akin to a cinematic experience, an approach that can be applauded for. Additionally, there's the small expansions that can be done after finishing the main campaign, with a few extra stages to squeeze a bit more content out of the game. But of course, the main attraction after these will be with the modding scene. There's already many mods created for this title to provide a completely different experience altogether, some of them being interesting original creations or homages to some well-known series.
If you haven't played this game yet, what are you doing? It's pretty cheap at this point and easy to pick up. The effects of distance can be felt to this day with some homages to it, or newer games attempting to add a bit more depth into the gameplay, and I believe this one fits into that category.
Neodash at its core plays like Distance, but sprinkles in some of the more stylish driving techniques from other titles like, say, Trackmania and Rocket League, with many of its tracks feeling more like a gauntlet of skill, with the ability to boost, drift, hover, and defy gravity, all for the attempt to avoid obstacles and reach the finish line as fast and as stylish as possible. The better we do, the more points we earn to spend on visual customization. The loop itself comes from repeating completed tracks and perfecting them to some insane degrees, which is where the Trackmania part comes in, as the physics are pretty solid and quite consistent. It really comes in clutch when you need to steer away from obstacles or towards the boost pickups and the invincibility pickups that may come up, especially with how intense the later tracks can be, although the obstacles can be one of the game's weak points, as every damaging obstacle destroys the car in a single hit. No damage phases, just straight up destruction. Alternative to this is being so slow the game just kills you on the spot, as the track disintegrates on a time limit, becoming the pivotal challenge for the secret tracks as they push players to the limit, as the track disintegration gets significantly faster in these stages. The progression for the game itself is stage by stage, with some of them having branching paths with 2 gates, while the blue gate leads us to regular progression, taking us through regular worlds with more standard difficulty challenges. The red gates, on the other hand, are often hidden in plain sight, requiring some special means or techniques to even reach them in the first place, leading to the difficulty branch of the stage, one where skill and mastery of the game's mechanic gets pushed to the limit. Clearing the gates itself pretty much grants us medals based on clear time, but that's just for leaderboards. The other thing will be currency, which is tallied based on factors like clear time, drifts, stunts, and some other things. This currency fortunately isn't going to be used for things like performance upgrades or features, as every single one of them are unlocked from the very start, only for cosmetic purposes, although the way it is done here is a bit questionable. Each section of the shop contains only 2 parts, so 2 base colors, 2 light options, 2 bodies, wheels, and etc. If you want to get the other items, you have to refresh by spending the currency, which effectively re-rolls them seemingly at random. This can significantly increase the cost and make the game feel like a grind at some points, which becomes an issue when the campaign is pretty much over. Luckily, the game does have custom track support, where we can make our own tracks, setting it to have music-based lighting and all the decorations. On top of that, we can also upload these tracks for other players to play on as well, with many tracks made for the purposes of either challenging time trials, survival challenges, or weird goofy stuff.
So while the game is short, I can mostly feel okay with it for being pretty cheap, and the player-made tracks are quite interesting. Maybe if the customization is better, this would be great, but I think that's enough of the neon futuristic landscape. Instead, let's look at a different view of what the future may look like.
As we flip the coin and enter the post-apocalyptic future, where the machines are treated like gods, determining the line between life and death. Wait, that's just the summary to Mad Max. But anyways, it's not that different in this game. Fumes is an indie title that is more of a car combat experience, like the Twisted Metal or Vigilante 8 series. At the moment, only the demo is available, already containing a pretty sizable amount of content, with a lot of heavy inspiration from the aforementioned movie series and a couple of twists to the presentation and potential storytelling, taking a lot of cues from similarly looking indie games with use of simple polygons and pixelated textures to give it a sort of retro aesthetic. With the mix of gameplay, it's not hard to feel as if this game is somehow connected to Ultra Kill, another indie game you should definitely check out. With how fast-paced the shooting and mobility can be, it will put you through the test. Thankfully, this game is a bit more lenient with its difficulty. Weapons seem to have infinite ammo, while health and nitrous regenerate after a short while, which comes in handy when the enemy swarms with numbers, usually coming in a group of 4, and armed with either guns or buzzsaws. Putting mobility is a very important skill to have, even more so when platforming sections come up. But once we're done with the tutorial, the game opens up significantly, introducing moving workshops where we can upgrade and change up parts for personal preferences. The type of car body will also determine the weapon slots available, with smaller cars being nimble and quick, while the others can equip more. It's also important to take note where each weapon's placement is, due to the limitation that can come from it. Weapons equipped on the hood, for example, won't be able to aim behind the car, while the ones on the roof will be able to turn 360 degrees. The other important part to pay attention to is the suspension, determining the car's overall traction and speed on the surfaces, or how the car will react to jumps, bumps, or turning and braking. And obviously, the guns. As of currently, there doesn't seem to be any ammo economy, so the only thing to consider are mostly with damage stats and firing mode that you would prefer. Unlocking them pretty much devolve into a straightforward cycle of killing a group of enemies, killing another group of enemies to steal our cargo truck, or killing more groups of enemies to protect our cargo truck. The loop is pretty simple, and the adrenaline-fueled combat can be addictive, so I don't mind this for now. For every mission done, we get some randomized loot from bodies, suspension, weapons, liveries, and stickers. Any duplicates can be scrapped to upgrade the same type of items, so tier C items can be upgraded to tier S with enough scrap. There's also these outposts scattered all over the map. They're weird and located in places that can be quite challenging to traverse, for a reason. They seem to only take in supply boxes, which basically means sacrificing a gun slot, so you might want to consider the risk and distance between the workshop. All of this will be important for the boss battles that await. Complete enough missions from the hit list and a boss battle will appear on the map. Too bad they're not up for any fair fights, as they will respawn their minions during the fight. This is despite them also having multiple phases during the battle. Once the boss is dead, we get their parts, and the next hit list is unlocked with their specific missions as well. From there, it's just repetition.
Which for a demo showcase is pretty fun as it is, as it's already showing the game's strength, which is what the demo should do, with plans of having more stories, activities, equipment in the future. Living in that post-apocalyptic future may seem dire, but if I'm forced to play Flatout 3 again, well, just hand me the gun instead. Luckily, the next game is not that bad. Actually, it's quite the opposite.
Trailout is pretty well known as one of the few spiritual successors to the Flatout series, with mostly similar identities but modernized with a bunch of references to other games and media. But even without them, the presentation of the game is already pretty striking just from its own original bits, with the eccentric main character Mikhailich seeking his own fortunes in the Trailout Festival after a crash that left him broke. Being a tribute to the Flatout series, the game primarily focuses on two types of events: racing with a dash of carnage and complete destruction demolition derby, both of which are finally illustrated from the tutorials. Once we are done with the Trailout tryouts, the real game begins with the goal of beating every other member of the blacklist, each with their own characteristics, vehicle of choice, special liveries, and references. But of course, they're not gonna instantly accept the challenge from the newcomer. We gotta earn some rep first, so to do that we'll have to earn some fans, which luckily in this game come from almost every gameplay avenue there is, and it also comes in handy to unlock the vehicles, as each car requires a specific amount of fans to be purchasable. However, since we're initially only purchasing the wreckage, the pricing can be a bit misleading, since we'll need to buy the parts first to actually use them in races. It does explain the car choices given as our starters, as all of them cost around the same and a bit more if you're willing to splurge for upgrades, like with the chassis that can be basic for racing, or the stronger versions that are more useful on derbies with stronger durability at the cost of speed. From there, it's mostly the usual upgrades, like with the engines for more accelerations, gearbox for higher top speed, suspension for better handling, and a couple of choices of tires based on their terrains. Then we also have nitrous, with their first tier being the simplest, the second one having a double tap feature for extra damage, and the highest tier providing a passive refill mechanic. After that, it's basically just the cosmetics option, like colors and liveries or the license plate. It is noticeable to see most of the vehicles in this game fall into some categories of either being cheap European sedans, old American muscle or new, and the big trucks. Now there are a few Japanese tuners or European supercars, but they're mostly far in between from each other. But then we also have some DLC vehicles like the bikes, some iconic cars from movies and video games, or just a bunch of literal heavy rigs. And it is good to also see that earning money in this game is not that difficult. We already earn a pretty sizable chunk from winning races, but just like the fans, there are other sources of earning cash. But for now, let's actually get to the gameplay. The events in the game are split into two main ones and a bonus set. The races themselves are also split into three categories, from the regular races taking place in open open city or village roads with a ton of things to destroy. The closed dirt cross tracks where carnage happens more often between racers, mainly due to the design of the tracks, and a one-make race where everyone has to use the same preset vehicles. For the demo derby events, it's either a point-based scoring or last man standing, or yet another one-make event. This is where the track designs really shine. Since regular races take place around the open roads, the amount of destructible things in the map can go really crazy, but there are times where the tracks are so open, there won't be as much carnage, although these tracks make up for it by adding a different type of challenge. While the cross tracks can be interesting despite taking place in closed circuits, the problem with them is mainly due to the crossroads setups that can just screw up your race out of nowhere. It's more of a problem due to the game not taking into account things like destruction-related gameplay features as a determining point for victories, just some extra fans. The derby tracks themselves are mainly the usual open arena setting, with varying size to accommodate the amount of enemies or just how many props are littered all over the place. Winning usually requires a top 3 finish at the very least, but that also means minimal cash and fans gained. As a bonus, there's the mechanics of using online interactions with fans to gain some extra currencies. Here, Mihailych can take on requests from fans, which usually will revolve around doing things like destroying opponents, letting Mihailych fly from hard crashes, destroying props, and so on. Mihailych can also take donations from fans, some of which may be recognizable. Put all of those resources together and it's time to battle against the Blacklist members, each with their own set of events. While it may be cool to have it be a one-on-one duel, it's not gonna be as simple. See, this is why being well prepared pays off. And once we're done, we get some neat cutscenes between Mihailych and the boss, unlocking their cars in the wreck dealership and the next set of events for the Blacklist. That's pretty much for the progression loop. But there's also some of the extra stuff that I haven't mentioned yet, like the costumes for Mihailych, the free mode that can be used to gain more fans and money, the split screen multiplayer, and some of the extra game modes like the stunts a la Flatouts, Hunter Pursuit mode, Escape, and Hot Potato, or Joker's Roulette Randomizer. There are a ton of ways to play this game, and it's definitely an enjoyable tribute to the Flatout series, one that does it with a lot of humor, sometimes a bit too much, but they know when to keep it serious at times. If you're looking for a more straightforward and serious spiritual successor to Flatout, then it might be best to look at Wreckfest as an alternative, which just so happens to be developed by Bugbear themselves, the original developers of Flatout 1 and 2. I would recommend them as they're very solid games in general as well.
If you haven't played this by any chance, I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for that old Flatout style experience with a bit of story attached to it.
To say Outrun is a legendary series would be an understatement. While it is a fairly simple arcade racer, its impact on the racing genre can be felt to this day. In the last indie video, I went and covered Hot Shot Racing, which was developed by Sumo Digital, the people behind the 3D era of Outrun. But this time we are going even closer to the original DNA with slight changes. Horizon Chase Turbo is borderline similar to its inspirations. You can't help but feel as if it's a legitimate Outrun sequel, from the way it emulates that scrolling technique for the tracks, the environment, the animations, and physics, until we get to the gameplay and progression, dubbed as the World Tour mode, taking us through every corner of the world starting from California. The vehicle selection is going to mostly be based on real-life cars with some significant accuracy to the real-life counterparts, each with their own stats to specify their biggest strength, whether it's speed or handling, a deliberation that will be important based on your driving style or the upcoming tracks. Unlike the original Outrun, tracks in this game are designed as a circuit and are usually made to be wide due to the amount of opponents on track. The varying challenge comes from cornering, as they are often the places where overtaking becomes prominent, as some cars are just not as good to deal with these obstacles, even more so when there's a bunch of opponents covering every side of the road, or when the pickups start becoming a factor, as each track always has tokens to collect for more points, to unlock tracks and faster cars, or the more important fuel to keep the race going. It gets a bit weird due to the way AI opponents are designed. They're assigned specific placements at the start of the race, and if they just so happen to be blocked by another AI opponent, it'll seem as if they have some monstrous rubber band to get their assigned placement back. And while the game does feature some nitrous, it's more of a contingency plan than something to use or rely on. As long as you don't crash, nitrous won't be necessary to win, even for the longer tracks that have nitrous pickups. At the end of every race, final placement, tokens, and remaining fuel bars will determine how many points are acquired. As a bonus for finishing first and obtaining all tokens, the reward will come with a Super Trophy, which will unlock a special car once all Super Trophies are obtained from a region. Besides unlocking cars and regions, the points also unlock extra stages called upgrade races, and it basically does as advertised. Win the race to make a choice between 3 upgrade options that will be applied to every single car. From there, it's basically the same loop until all regions are dominated. At some point, the other game modes will unlock, such as Adventurers, where each car has their own assigned races to beat for a special livery at the end, Tournament, which brings back-to-back races in each region, and the Endurance Race. Besides these game modes, alternative careers are also made available with the Ayrton Senna Tribute, introducing a special career mode where we follow the footsteps of the legendary driver, or championship mode with increasing difficulty levels. The driving school is basically a simplified version of the regular World Tour mode, with half the total racers and lesser amount of tracks, or the Summer Vibes campaign, which seems to be an even closer attempt at mimicking the style of Outrun, which is pretty much the goal of the game and where it excels at. A tribute to the Outrun series that tries to be as accurate without straight up becoming a complete ripoff, having its own ideas and designs that changes how players would interact with the game. For another example of an Outrun-like experience, we'll take a look into the stylish Slipstream, taking more liberties with its visual presentation, having more of the 80s synthwave style with its blocky, pixelated textures, or its direct inspirations to old Sonic titles, while retaining some of the original gameplay design of Outrun, plus a couple of extras to spice things up a notch. The Grand Tour mode tasks the player to reach the end of Stage 5, with each stage delivering the challenge from its limited timer, traffic, and randomized rivals, with the option to choose between the next stage at the end of each. It's actually cool to see the pyramid-style map selection once again, as it lets the player choose what stage to tackle with their unique environment, as each stage has its unique track layout and certain corner placement or radius which might benefit different cars or driving style. On the other end of the difficulty spectrum, there is the rewind feature. At most, we're allowed to go back 5 seconds and it recharges quick enough to survive the next corner. There's also the neat detail of having rivals' dialogue getting wind up during the rewind, or having them react directly to it. It really comes in handy when traffic decides to be a complete nuisance, as they'll have the random chance to switch lanes. For beating the Grand Tour mode, we don't really get anything beyond the achievement trophies. There are no currencies to grind, as every vehicle and stage are unlocked by default, so everything is already available to enjoy from the very start. Every car is available for the races, and every other game mode can be completed from the moment you boot up the game. So even if you don't like the classic Outrun experience, there are other modes that can entertain players with different preferences, like for example the single races and Grand Prix mode, turning the sprint layout tracks into circuits with 11 other cars on the field. Unlike the main mode, this one buffs up the opponents to an almost insane degree and removes all traffic. It's also cool to see how the tracks have been modified into a circuit layout, despite mostly using the same design choices as their default mode. The only problem I can see here is the 4-lap settings that can make the races feel like they're too long, especially in the Grand Prix races with its 5-race settings. Grand Prix mode does make up for it with some extra dynamics from car upgrades, with some allowance between each race to upgrade the 3 stats. Not only that, the increased number of buffed race rivals also lets the Slipstream mechanics shine, as they don't really get used much in the Grand Tour mode. But of course, it wouldn't be a complete racing game without the existence of a time trial mode. The remaining 2 modes are Battle Royale, which is basically the elimination mode where every rival gets taken out after each stage. Depending on the amount of rivals, this can be a short trip or one of the longest endurance events in the game, which is also one of the best methods to race through every stage available in this game in a single sitting. But then we have the Cannonball event, mixing up both Grand Tour and race modes, letting us choose which track to tackle in the 5 Grand Tour setting, adding both normal race opponents and the special rivals in a race, with traffic on top as well, making this the hardest mode in the game. But it's also the most customizable event, which honestly makes it the best thing the game has to offer. That is kind of the magic of this game. Despite the simplicity, it lifts itself beyond the inspirations of Outrun by adding enough ideas like these and some of the stylistic renditions of the game.
The lack of grind requirement makes this game feel like one of those titles that you can play anywhere on the go, especially if you have a Steam Deck. Speaking of which, most of the games that we covered today are available across all kinds of platforms, but this one is specifically available for the mobile devices, so no PC port and no console port.
And the attempts to dance around the usual mobile trappings in this game can be a bit interesting, especially knowing this game was developed by apparently 2 people. But anyways, the game's primary focus will revolve around drift racing with some underground vibes, which may explain the abundance of mountain roads and heavy use of corner for the track layouts. At the very start, of course, the game kicks us off with a tutorial on the storage dock area with a pre-tuned A86, just to get used to the mobile controls and the game's very drifty physics. Like, it is surprisingly easy to initiate drifts here, but also not so simple. Maintaining the drift will take some learning with some proper throttle and steering control. And just like most street racing games, nitrous, earned from doing basically anything that would increase the scores, whether it be driving at high speeds, drifting, and many more. I also have to commend this game for doing something most mobile games still fail to do: allow the players to skip the actual tutorials. For finishing the tutorial, we are given a sum of cash to purchase our first ride, which unfortunately only opens the option to 2 vehicles, with some others only purchasable with the premium currency. The limited amount of starter selection makes sense. There's only 18 cars in total in the game currently, split into 5 different tiers and performance scores. This is also where the first reveal of this game's currencies are shown, and they're definitely overwhelming, but we'll get to those later, and more importantly, how they are handled in the progression loop. So either way, the logical choice will be between these 2 cars. They should have similar stats, so the only criteria here is whichever shape and color you prefer. Once we get to the garage, the gameplay loop is then revealed. Each contract will be color-coded to easily tell which activities are tied to them, and for completing the contracts, we'll get rewards in the form of multiple currencies or visual and performance upgrades for the car we're driving. Activating these contracts, however, will require the green tokens, which at the very least can be refilled via currency contracts for free, so there shouldn't be much problems there. Including every single currency in the game, whether it be regular cash, premium currency, and energy tickets. At most, 3 contracts can be activated at the same time. Anything more will require the previous contract to be removed or completed first. Now, there are some caveats attached here. For the currency contract, it starts with not being able to pick the same type of currency for 3 slots at once. The second caveat is the game artificially limiting how much players are allowed to grind. Once the amount owned goes above a specific number, the game will not allow you to take any of that currency contract. For the parts, they're simply limited by player levels, and you still have to pay to actually install them in the first place. To make it a bit worse, the contracts are also time limited, and this is using real time, not some kind of in-game time as well, which basically means you have to really binge through all 3 contracts if they are taken at the same time, or risk wasting contract tokens on nothing. Most of the contracts will feature 1 to 3 event types that have to be completed before the time runs out, or without ever losing if the contract is a sudden death type, taking place within 2 maps of the game, which can be driven on as an explorable open world, which really gives off NFS 2015 vibes, just without any traffic or overabundance of rain. The second track is also only available once we've done some contracts to open them first at level 7, with every contract event taking place on almost every corner of the map, covering the regular race types of circuits and sprint race. Marker Hunt, which is more of a free-form sprint race like in Midnight Club. Drift Attack, making you battle against an opponent to get as many drift points within the time limit. Alternative to this is the Drift Sprint, which simply tallies drift scores until the finish line. The Drift Zone, a simple score requirement around a couple of corners. And then there's the Drift and Sprint Trials, the most annoying one, as they're that type of game mode where the game instantly disqualifies you for sniffing a wall. It goes in line with how punishing touching the wall can be in general, as any nitrous buildup instantly evaporates, while in the more lenient drift events, any score still being built up in a chain gets instantly erased. But all of this effort should come to something fruitful by unlocking more visual and performance upgrades. Mostly visual. This is the game's biggest strength, as the entire visual upgrades goes beyond what would normally be seen. It's right up there with the likes of Underground 2 for the amount of options available. Like, just look at this. So many body parts are customizable, and then there's even more in the wheel options for rims, tire models, and the coating. Custom livery editors that also don't suck for mobile controls, with the option to toggle badges, neon lights, stance tuning for height and camber, and the extremely linear and simplified performance upgrades. The only problem is, of course, to get most of these items, the grind requirement is pretty extreme. Having to deal with contracts for each singular part, and then having to also grind contracts for the cash, can be insanely time consuming. We haven't even gotten to the black market yet, where we can look for full body kit sets, all of which are only purchasable with the premium currency. I think it's also a mistake to scale the black market prices according to tiers, effectively making every tier above be outright impossible to grind for, or the more blunt phrasing, paywalled, which sucks even if they are cosmetics only. Alternatively, we can also skip the grind, which really is the biggest problem with this game. It either takes way too long of a time to grind for these parts or pay up for each car.
And it's pretty cool for a 2-developer project, especially getting that much customization option in the game in the first place. But if you want something with similar ideas taken up a notch, probably a bit too far, then this game might be the answer for you.
JDM, or Japanese Drift Master, was just released a couple days ago. Most of you have likely heard of this one, thanks to its approach and design choices. Like straight up having an anime intro and the utilization of manga panels for its storytelling in place of having cutscenes. Most of them only taking up a couple of pages makes things brief. Every part of the story is short enough to immediately get people to the gameplay. Of course, this isn't perfect. There are some points in the story that can feel like we've just jumped past several chapters in some sections, but it does well to introduce, build up, and endear us to the characters involved, which can be revisited from the game's phone UI, alongside the ability to read messages and replay main story missions. For the rest of the game, it won't stray far either, with most of the map being heavily inspired by a ton of Japanese visuals from the mountains, city, beach, and all of the references they could cram into this space. And this map is pretty big, not because of the sheer size, but primarily thanks to how many roads are utilized in it, designed to accommodate some intense drift event layouts, grip time attack battles, and some occasional drag races. The map overall feels like a mishmash of some of the best places to visit in Japan, with a ton of references to places from real-life tourism sites. There's even some highway sections that can really feel like we've been transported to Tokyo Xtreme Racer somehow. After some progression, more garages gets unlocked all over the map that can be used as a hub to switch cars, do some performance upgrades and tuning, or to fast travel between areas. While exploring, we get to listen to some tunes offered, and they are certainly varied. Just look at all of those radio options. There are some missing genres, sure, but I'm certain this already fulfilled the music taste for most players. The remaining available tracks are closed circuits, often used for Kawabata's driving school or other races. If you look close enough, they'll likely remind you of some real-life tracks as well, with their layout, mostly used within the game's main storyline, spread throughout several chapters, which to their credit constantly switches things up to make them not feel as repetitive or too similar in a lot of places, with how each main mission constantly asks us for different things to progress, like how sometimes the requirement is going to simply be finishing races in first place, earning drift scores, outrunning opponents, impressing chicks, and many more examples. If you're having issues with these events, there is a bunch of control and preference options to cater towards every type of racing game player out there. Whether someone is more into the arcadey, super easy drift setup, or someone more serious looking into some challenging drift mechanics on a steering wheel setup with the Simcade options, even down to having some more thorough options for gearing to suit almost every controller device available in the market. All we need from that point is practice, either from the prologue or the game's version of a driving school, teaching everyone the ways to drift in multiple terrains and weather conditions, while learning more about how the scoring and multiplier work. It's worth mentioning how weird it's done here, as light collisions won't kill off the chain, but spinning out will. The detection is kind of weird. It mainly uses the angle counter at the bottom of the screen, but if you ever touch the red parts, even if the drift is recovered, the game still considers it as a spin out and kills the chain anyways. Alternatively, there's the more simple driving test for grip racing or drag races. In general, it's always beneficial to sprinkle in some grip racing knowledge to drift events and vice versa, placed quite well into the story while still letting experienced players just outright ignore its existence. But it might be better early on to do as much as possible, because of the main rewards from license tests being one of the fastest way to earn rep XP early on. This is the most important bit to level up, at least in the initial phase of the game, entirely based on the things it logs behind, like the upgrade part, effectively capping the maximum performance one can achieve based on what's available. With rep distributed for both player level and car proficiency, it also unfortunately really encourages the idea of locking into one car at a time to increase proficiency. As an additional mechanic, due to the game's attempt at taking inspiration towards Forza Horizon's skill points, the option to level up from doing open world exploration is there, just basking in the environment or getting used to the road by driving around skillfully. For money, there are a few options at the start. Completing main events is for the best initially, at least until the game starts unlocking more events and things to participate in. After that point, the option goes to either the sushi shop or underground races. They both work differently, so I guess it depends on which one you'd prefer. Sushi delivery works like the way it was intended as the main story versions. Deliver them with style and avoid collisions to get as much money as possible. This is not as easy as it sounds thanks to the traffic and the occasional wall that can have its collision models stick out. Plus, at the moment, the GPS can be quite buggy, but at least if you finish the whole delivery, it'll be worth the money, including delivery style and time limited. While underground races are more bet orientated, putting a risk for a higher burst of cash, the intensity is also entirely dictated by how much money is bet, adding another modifier to the reward risk factor of this game mode. Grip events will have its time requirement shift, and drift event will have its score target move depending on the bet amount. There are also some events that we can do, like some close track races for both drift and grip. This is also the multiplayer aspect of the game currently. But with rep and money in hand, it's time we talk about the main attraction of the game. The cars of this game are peculiar, not because they're questionably designed, but because of this mix of having licensed vehicles and some lookalikes with made-up names. Brands such as Nissan, Mazda, Honda, and Subaru would show up and provide their car licenses, while some other licenses like not Toyota or not Mitsubishi are still not available. But even then, these lookalikes don't look bad at all. Just weird to have some recognizable names next to fake ones. Now, unfortunately, we're stuck with only a single option for our starter. Once we do have enough money to buy anything else, we have the option of 27 cars from the 6 brands mentioned before, with more coming in later updates based on their roadmap and some in-game lines that hints at potential Western brands inclusion, each having their stats and drivetrain to pay attention to and some prices that will ramp up, though every now and then there could be some kind of random sale going on which will put a random car on discount. But now let's cover the other aspects of these cars, which can go a bit in depth once we start talking about performance upgrades, with many of them being locked behind the rep levels and are tunable to some degrees. I will have to make a correction from my previous video, but you do have to purchase specific upgrades first to be able to tune these parts. That way we can personalize the drift handling based on our preferences. It's also pretty neat to have them try and teach players how to tune throughout the comic panels as well. While visual customizations are pretty limited and tame for the most part, at least until we get to the Bosuzoku parts, with some body kits and exhausts to make the silliest looking monstrosities to ever grace the Guntama prefecture. Now unfortunately, the game as of currently is still pretty janky and badly balanced. Things like difficulty settings being questionable. On easy and medium, the game is a complete cakewalk, while on hard difficulty, the game becomes a complete pendulum swing. Sometimes the opponent will not score enough drift points to win, or they will be almost untouchable without a near perfect tuning build, which is where the rank upgrade system really starts to backfire, as some of the later cars require higher rank requirements to unlock their performance parts. It gets extra annoying when opponents in drift battles will sometimes ram into you and cause a spin out, especially in the more tight roads. And unfortunately, the game is yet another victim of Unreal Engine 5's horrible optimization. Upscaling and frame generation is turned on by default to hide the issue, but even with those turned on, there are the occasional times of frame drops being so severe. With the roadmap that has been showcased also, since the devs are actively taking feedback as of currently, hopefully the game will be able to overcome its issues sooner than later, as it is one of those games with a ton of potential lying underneath. Like, the drift physics are pretty good, grip needs a bit of work, but it does alright with some tuning, and its presentation are definitely unique. Although some probably need to bonk whoever's responsible for the story. They certainly didn't hold back on some aspects. Let's stick to the mountain roads for a short bit, with a game called Easy Delivery Co. It's yet another pixel-based driving game centered around driving around a mountain village at around winter, where every single person, including ourselves, seems to either be a cat or dog person. An artistic vision I can get behind with, just like with the choice to utilize a CRT slider, and more choices that trickle to the gameplay elements, like the constant snow, the buildings that seem abandoned at first glance, the choice to have a computer screen as the menu, conversations, and the wacky amount of storage boxes to deliver. The constant snow and blizzards, despite turning the desolate village into something that looks like Silent Hill, it's there to limit how long you can be outside of this spunky little K-Cod, outright turning any on-foot situations into a challenge that needs to be considered beforehand. Just like how the basic act of driving downhill becomes a challenge with the winding mountain roads and the massive clump of snow covering sections of the road. Of course, to get things started, the initial map is logged to the upper town section, cut off by a massive snow pile from the rest of the map, which basically means the first few delivery missions are extremely short until we can buy a shovel with the money collected. Once that's done, the rest of the map is unlocked with additional gameplay factors of deactivated radio stations, bringing in more radio frequency for more music after being reactivated, and finally the path towards the lower and denser town areas, which also introduces more shops and gas stations. Because yes, this game also has a fuel economy, and besides that, there's the energy for our main character, constantly chugging down energy drinks every few hours just to keep themselves awake for non-stop delivery action. Be sure to throw these cans responsibly though. Not that there are any rewards from it, but you wouldn't want to be known as a menace to society. That also includes trying to jump off the mountain. no shortcuts. From here on, we're basically just doing deliveries for the sake of collecting money to get some new tools for the second radio station, which exposes us to more variety of delivery boxes, sometimes taking us back to the upper side of town with higher payouts for longer distances. Some of these boxes can be quite stressful, while others are super easy, assuming you don't go flat out against a pile of snow. In the case of packages being destroyed, we can at least reset, taking us back to the sender for a second chance with lower cash bonus. But this is currently a bit weird and bugged in the current demo. Sometimes the boxes are just completely gone once destroyed, but then there's times where you can just pick them back up from the truck bed and place them back in to instantly fix them up. Either way, the demo ends once we reactivate the second radio station, but that doesn't lock us out from the repeatable gameplay loop. So if you're the type that enjoys these kinds of simple physics-based challenges for driving, you can just repeat them over and over again. For what's there in the demo, it's a pretty interesting foundation for the game, one which I hope gets a bit more with an even bigger map and the expansion of lore regarding the company we're working for, and this elusive doggo that has been giving us instructions and possibly acting as our mentor. Mixed with some of the villager dialogues, locked items, and locations, this game is definitely ripe with the potential to be pretty deep in terms of gameplay and storytelling. This one is a bit weird, for multiple reasons. It's another solo dev title about cars, but not the kind you'd expect. It's primarily a survival game, with all the bells and whistles expected like a hunger and thirst system, threats in every corner, and these things.
Disgusting!
But the overall gameplay is also survival based on cars or bikes, with the only goal to mention being the longest distance traveled, and that can be done in many ways or multiple vehicles. This is kind of the interesting tidbit about this title. It's janky and has all the average survival game mechanics and pitfalls, minus having to punch trees and rocks, but its designs surrounding the vehicles are surprisingly in-depth, giving that weird charm for people that are more into cars and racing than the average survival game player. Let's start from the very basics. The game has random seeds, determining how the overall world will shape, the placement of buildings, items, wrecks, and parts. Most importantly, of course, is the starter car. Depending on the car we get, it will determine several things like what kind of fuel is required for the engine and the consumption rate, how much storage space is available, fuel, oil, and coolant storage tanks, the drivetrain, weight distribution, rev limit, and way too many other things to account for. And these cars don't need to always look like scrap all the time. We can turn them into brand new looking cars with some tools like the brush and sponge, giving them a proper shine, or the spray paint to change up their part colors. And if that's not enough, we can also mix and match every single part of the car to our liking, like attaching a random part of another car to create some of the most Frankenstein looking monstrosity to graze the planet. Or let's just say you found a wrecked car while exploring and have the desire to claim it. Then you pretty much can, as long as you can get the engine fueled up correctly again and remove whatever random liquid is in them. Then recovering the vehicle would be an easy task. This is primarily because of the game not having any damage systems, so there is no need to repair things from wreckages, which is weird, but at the same time it removes another angle of having to deal with part durability. And because of the distance between one building to the next, keeping that car topped up and able to run will be very important. In a solo session, this can be a run-ending disaster. In multiplayer, this will mean waiting for another player to help, which is pretty much going to be the backbone of the game, as unfortunately there are just not many things to do or find as a solo game. Random events may trigger every now and then, but they don't happen often enough to carry the experience. Its best experience is something more chill, like a big aimless road trip that can be entertaining to pick up and play every couple weeks or months, which is pretty much the game's biggest weakness as it is currently. It's a great stream game under the hands of the most chaotic individuals, but for a regular player, it's either a great goofy multiplayer session or an overly simple and chill driving experience with not much happening. I would somewhat recommend this, but also with the caveat of the game not having been updated for a couple of months now, so keep that in mind. So now that we've seen more variety from the indie scene, we've somehow only managed to scratch the surface. Each day, dozens of indie games and potential big blockbusters get released, to the point of becoming one of the newer gold rushes. Therefore, there's many more indie games, whether it's racing or simply driving, that remains uncovered yet. Hopefully, we'll keep seeing more of the amazing side that can come out of the indie market, and potentially the AA space as well. Especially now that we've seen more experienced developers cutting themselves off from the AAA industry to do their own thing in either space. So here's hoping to see more magic come out of the woodwork for years to come. So that leaves us with the end. Throwing it back to you, dear viewers. Have you by any chance played any of these titles mentioned here? What are your thoughts about them, and are there even more indie racing titles you think deserve to be mentioned? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.